I've generally got pretty mixed feelings about FiiO products. I really like some of what they do, I don't like some of the other things they do, and so the FiiO K7 is an interesting product for me. I didn't expect a huge amount from it initially. I liked the K5, but it didn't blow me away. But then when I actually stopped and looked at what the K7's offering, and more importantly for the price that it's offering it, that's when I started to get really interested. So let's jump in and I'll explain why. At $200 US, the FiiO K7 here offers you amazing performance and versatility for a very, very cheap price. Within this tiny little box, and you get an inline switch mode power supply, a little bit like a compact laptop power supply. For that price and for this amount of space that it takes up, what you get is a THX amplifier circuit, which I'm kind of neither here nor there on. Sometimes I enjoy THX amps, sometimes I don't. But you're getting a THX AAA 788 Plus amplifier circuit, a pair of AK4493 SEQ DAC chips, and a total package that in one single box is going to take your digital inputs, amplify the outputs, it'll take an analog input as well, as I'll show you shortly, and that will deliver 2 watts into a 32 ohm load via the balanced output, or 1.7 watts into 32 ohms via the single-ended output. So plenty of power for the price, and also, as I said, lots of versatility. And so let's kick off by having a look at what's going on the K7. Starting at the back here, we've got a pair of RCA outputs. That's for preamp output, so you can actually run this as a preamp to your active speakers if you want to, an external headphone amp, etc. We've also got a pair of RCA inputs, so as I said, this can be an amplifier only if you want it to be, or as well as being a DAC and an all-in-one. We've then got 3 different digital inputs being coaxial, optical, and USB, and then of course a power input for the supplied switch mode power supply. Coming around to the front of the device, things are quite simple still in a good way. We've got a source selection switch, which is going to go through your 4 different sources, so 3 digital plus your analog input. We've got a gain switch, so you've got high and low gain. We've also got a mode switch that's going to take you through whether it's a DAC, a preamp, or a headphone amp mode. And that's great because it means if you just want to leave your headphones plugged in all the time, you can very quickly and easily switch to a line level output from the back or a volume controlled output from the back as a preamp, or of course over to your headphones. We've then got a volume knob, which is also the power control. So this is going to switch off when you go all the way to the bottom and switch on when you start to turn it on, of course. From there, we've got a pair of headphone outputs. On the top, we've got a 6.3mm single-ended. On the bottom, we've got a 4.4mm balanced output. And so for just $200 US, you're getting a huge amount here. When you think about the fact that there are dongles on the market that cost more than this, and this is offering you not just more power, but also giving you things like 3 different digital inputs, not just USB, but also optical and coaxial, as well as an analog input, and then fully dedicated and separated preamp outputs separate from the headphones, that makes this incredibly good value, assuming it sounds good, and we'll get to that in a second. If you're trying to work out what piece of gear you should buy next, then the Passion for Sounds Recommends database might be helpful for you. In the description box of every single video, just down here, you'll find the Passion for Sounds Recommends section. If you click on this link, it'll take you through to the Passion for Sounds Recommends Airtable database. What you'll see in here is every single product that I've ever reviewed and recommend, in some cases products that I own but maybe haven't reviewed but recommend. And then once you're in here, you can use the filter button up here to decide to filter by things like whether or not the product type is for a headphone, for example. So maybe you're looking for a headphone, filter it by that, and you can now see every headphone I recommend. You can sort it by price, which is the default sorting, or any other sorting method that you want. And then once you've got the list of products you're looking for, you've got the links to the reviews of the products, and then also purchasing links for global retailers and also regional retailers for the US, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So feel free to play around with this, sort it, filter it however you want to. It won't affect what anybody else sees, and you can hopefully find just the right products for you. I hope this is helpful, and now let's get back to the review. I described the sound from the K7 as being smooth but very well delivered. It's natural, it's easy to listen to, there's nothing forced or strained about it, there's also nothing too sterile about it, which some of the THX amps can do a little bit. And something else that I liked was that I didn't get the same sense of bluntedness from the sound from the K7. Some other FiiO products I've tried, like the BTR7 and even the K9 Pro to some degree, both of those have a sense of kind of blunting the notes a little bit, and I didn't get that feeling from the K7. That doesn't mean it's a world beater, it doesn't mean it's better than the K9 Pro, but I do think it's doing a sort of a more natural delivery of the sound. And so ultimately, and this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but it's not, ultimately it's just not doing anything wrong. It's delivering good, solid sound at a price point that's incredibly good value and really not messing anything up. And I think at this price point, that's the key. I don't expect something at $200 to redefine the hobby, but I absolutely expect it to give me good quality sound that doesn't leave me wanting, and that's what the K7 does. Whilst I was testing the sound quality from the K7 just in isolation, so just thinking about it on its own, one of the things I always like to test with a device like this is whether there's a significant difference between single-ended and balanced outputs. And so using the exact same headphones with a balanced cable and then an adapter for the single-ended, I jumped back and forth between the two, and what I heard was that generally speaking, I think the sound quality is basically indistinguishable. You might get just a little tiny bit more soundstage size and separation from balanced, but it's so tight and so close that I absolutely wouldn't want to try and pick it in a blind test. And so at this point, I was really impressed with what the K7 was delivering for me, as I said, in isolation, with no context, no comparisons. And so that then got me thinking about what else could you buy for the money, or indeed could you even buy something for the same money that's going to come close to the performance of the K7? After looking around my office and checking out my past reviews, the only thing that even comes close to being the same sort of performance and features for the similar sort of pricing was the SMSL stack that I've got here. This is the SU-6 and the SH-6 stack. It's a stack that I really, really like, but even then, it's still $90 more. Which when we're talking about a starting price of $200 for the K7, that's nearly 50% again on top of the price. So it is a big leap, but having said that, sometimes I've found in the past that going to separates where you've got the DAC and the amp as two different units, sometimes that can result in much better sound, so I thought it was worth a comparison. I tried two different tracks on these two because the first one was very much more of a smooth, vocal-oriented track, and I also wanted to test out things like bass performance. And so where I started off was Manhattan. It's a live recording of Manhattan by Sarah Bareilles. And as I went between the SMSL stack and the K7, I felt like the K7 was resolving a little bit more detail than the SMSL stack. Having said that, the SMSL stack was a little bit richer and fuller in the vocals, which I did like, and the sibilant sounds like S and T were just a bit crisper from the K7. And so I'm not going to say that one's better or worse here, so much as that they're different. If you're looking for a bit of extra resolution, detail, and attack or energy in the upper registers, that's where I think the K7 is actually better, despite being cheaper, than the SMSL stack. Having said that, if you want a slightly richer, fuller, kind of mid-range focused sound, then that's where I think the SMSL stack is just a little bit tilted that way in tonality and could be better for some. Less fatiguing potentially, better for a brighter headphone potentially. And so I'd say both are pretty comparable at this point. But again, the SMSL stack is costing you $90 more for a comparable product. Moving over then to a completely different track and listening to Gold by Imagine Dragons. And I feel like the SMSL stack was giving me a bit more weight in the bass. And that was both good in some ways, but bad in others. It meant that I was able to feel the bass a bit more, but it kind of also muddied everything up a little bit more. Once again, I felt like the K7 came across just a bit crisper, a bit cleaner. At higher volumes though, that could potentially get a bit more fatiguing depending on your headphones. And I also felt like the K7, and this goes back to that bass comment that I said before, I feel like the K7 was doing a slightly better job at giving me a bigger, larger soundstage, and more specifically, separating individual sounds better. That bass kind of weight, presence, slightly sort of less control from the SMSL stack, I think that was just muddying up the soundstage and the sense of separation a little bit, and in that regard, I did find myself preferring the K7. And so this comparison kind of cemented for me the fact that there's really no need to go and spend the extra money on something like the SMSL stack, because the K7 here is offering you everything that the SMSL stack does. I think the only thing that's probably clearly different is the SMSL stack does give you Bluetooth if that's important to you. The K7 doesn't. On the other hand, the K7 does give you balanced connection for your headphones if you care about that. The SMSL stack doesn't. And so for me, rather than spending $90 and having to have two power cables and get a comparable overall sound, I would absolutely just go straight for the K7. I think for the price and the performance, it's absolutely brilliant. And so I nearly wrapped things up here, but just as I was packing up, I thought I'd better do one more test. And that was to see if there's much benefit in spending significantly more than the K7, and maybe looking at a different all-in-one solution. I've recently reviewed here on the channel the Schiit Syn. The Syn's like an all-in-one headphone amp, preamp and DAC that also happens to have some rudimentary surround sound capabilities, and in fact for a proper surround sound setup, it's actually a full surround sound decoder. But if you were just looking for a nice, compact, high-performance all-in-one device, you could spend twice as much money as the K7, so we're jumping from $200 up to $399. And so I was curious if going to something like the Schiit Syn was going to give me a significant jump in performance. And I have to say that it did. So if you were thinking about spending more money and wondering where the value lies, then for me, rather than spending a little bit more in price, or 50% more, so it's not exactly little, but rather than spending $90 more on the SMSL stack and really just doing a sideways step in performance, I think you are better off spending a bit more money and going for something like a Schiit Syn. Or maybe you could go for a Modi Plus and a Magni. It's going to give you similar results in two different boxes. And specifically what I was hearing was that going to something like the Schiit products was giving me a better sense of detail and resolution. That was resulting in a better sense of separation of sounds within the soundstage, and also a better sense of punch and control over the bass. It wasn't that there was more bass necessarily from the Schiit products, but I felt like the control of the bass, the impact of the bass, was just a little bit better from the Schiit Syn. This one kind of turned the tables a little bit and now had the K7 sounding just a bit smoother and a little bit kind of less detailed, I'd say, less resolving potentially than the Schiit Syn. But having said that, it doesn't suddenly make the K7 a bad product. It just goes to show that I think the K7 is amazing anywhere up to about $300. But then once you go above the $300 mark, I think there are better products you can buy that are going to perform better. So it just depends on where you sit with your budget, your performance requirements, etc. But I think for $200 the K7 is very hard to beat and is going to be a strong recommendation from me. And so if you're in the market for something like this, so in other words, if you've got anywhere up to about $300 to spend, you're looking for a good quality headphone amp, DAC, combo all-in-one type situation, then the K7 should absolutely be really high on your list. As always, I'll put links down below in the description where you can go and pick one of these up for yourself if it sounds like a good fit for you. And also, as always, I hope you found the review useful, helpful and informative. If you have, I'd love it if you hit the like button, and consider subscribing and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.